Hi, and welcome to SQL Bits 2020, eventually, and my presentation on turning runbooks into notebooks, Azure Data Studio for the on-call DBA. This is the greatest data show, even though we're not able to be in person. Thank you for attending. Thanks for being a part of this. Like I said, this is turn runbooks into notebooks ADS for the on-call DBA. Azure Data Studio doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue, so here's where we are. A little bit of information about me. So, like I said, my name's Matt Gordon. I work for Insight DI. We do have an office in London, so if you have data and AI needs, we have a great team both in the States and there, and we'd be happy to help you out with that. But I'm not a salesperson. You're not here for that. So that's the end of that bit. I am SQL at Speed everywhere online. Twitter, GitHub, blog can be found at sqlatspeed.com, LinkedIn as well. So you're not here to learn about me, but I do want to take a few seconds to talk about what we're all here for, and that's so I lead the past local group in my hometown here, or the town where I live. I know this isn't a pass event, and I know the Microsoft Data Platform community lives all over the world, whether it's DPS in India, SQL Bits in England that draws most of Europe, or PASS Summit here in the States that kind of draws globally. The community we're a part of is wonderful, and not just one entity, but it only works if we all participate in it. And that's something I feel strongly about. My career is so much better. My life is so much better because of having volunteered for events, to speak, to moderate, to put signs up, all those sorts of things. So the fact that you're here and involved is awesome. Stay involved at whatever level it kind of works for you. But this is, I think, maybe the best technical community going, and I'd like to keep that up because I think it's been a benefit to us all, and it can continue even though things are a bit weird right now in terms of in-person and virtual events and all those sorts of things. But do stay involved. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting SQL Bits. There's wonderful people that put this on, and I cannot wait for when we are all able to get together in person. But you're not here to learn a lot about me, so there's one more slide about me, and then we're going to go on into the stuff here. So like I said, I'm SQL at Speed everywhere online. Great excuse to show this slide, and also to kind of remind you that if you want to reach out to me, whether it's during SQL Bits, afterwards, whatever, I'm always happy to chat about any of the things that I've spoken about, blogged about, whatever. Like I want to help. I really enjoy this. If you just want to talk motor racing only, I love it. I get to drive some of these cars once in a while. Not a lot this year, but a little bit. So if that's something that you want to discuss further, and Azure Data Studio is not your thing, but motor racing is, happy to chat about that. It is my favorite thing to talk about, data being a close-ish second. But that's enough about me. So let's get into more of this. So what are we here to talk about? We're here to talk about what Azure Data Studio is. So I recognize there's going to be some people at this session who may not be here because they know what this is. Like maybe it just filled a gap in the schedule, or like, well, I've heard about Azure Data Studio, but I think it's only for the cloud or whatever. I just want to learn more about it. So we're going to cover that up front. And then we're going to get into kind of DBA process type stuff. Let's talk about what your runbooks look like. Let's talk about what your notebooks can be and what those are. Let's learn how to make one, and then let's see some examples of what we can do with these. And then I kind of throw one more thing at the end where, if you don't want to build anything, the community has built some stuff for you, which is the great thing about being part of this whole group. So we'll have a look at that at the end if you're not where you want to build these things, but you do want to take advantage of what other folks have built to help you out. So let's get to it. Azure Data Studio, what and why? Fairly certain the folks on this slide don't know. I know a little bit about it. So let's dive into that. So it was the artist formerly known as SQL Operations Studio. In September 2018, which seems like 10 years ago, but was only about 2, SQL Operations Studio went GA, at which point Microsoft changed its name. The original title of this slide when I built this slide deck was Microsoft Sucks at Naming Things. And I realize that language is a bit not great, but they're not good at naming things, because the problem this setup is the middle bullet that I have there. I've done this session several times, and when I didn't really have this slide in it, it was later. A lot of people would say like, well, we're all on-prem, so I think that's really cool, but I can't use it. Like, I like notebooks, they're neat. I can't use it. I feel like this is probably a circumstance where the marketing folks went out and, it Azure Data Studio sounds great. ADS kind of rolls off the tongue, but it sounds like maybe it's only for Azure or only your data in Azure. And it can handle a bunch of that stuff, but it also is very much for on-prem. All the demos I'm going to show you, because of corporate restrictions on my normal laptop, are actually on a VM in Azure, but it's technically all an on-prem instance that I'm running these things against. So what is it for? So we'll use the marketing terminology here. It's a cross-platform database tool for using the Microsoft family of on-premises and cloud data platforms on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So it does run across those three. So, I'm on a Windows 10 corporate laptop, Windows Server 2019 VM that we'll have a look at here in a few minutes. But you can run this on Mac OS and Linux as well. And it does handle, and we'll get to this in a few slides, it's not just for SQL Server either. So if you're messing with Postgres or some other things that kind of Microsoft has brought into the Azure data family, we can do that as well. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So the next question I usually get, and this is one of those slide decks that has evolved quite a bit from where I started, is do I need to stop using Azure Data Studio? Or do I need to stop using SQL Server Management Studio? Sorry. No. But it depends what you're after. So I would argue Management Studio is not going anywhere. So people that will go out and say, well, this version's the last version of Management Studio they're ever going to do. There's no truth to that. But it does kind of depend on what your role is. And a lot of times, that line could be a bit blurry between, am I a database developer? Am I a DBA? Am I a little bit of both? So if you're doing a lot of development, I would argue that Azure Data Studio is a purer experience for you. And that's kind of to each their own. For me, that's true. For others, it might not be. But it is a little less cluttered. I mean, Management Studio, I've spent years of my life in that experience, and I like it. But I think for development, ADS works a little better. And you'll notice if you've done any application work in Visual Studio Code, ADS looks a lot like that. So if you're really comfortable in that environment, kind of a minimalist interface and all those, this is right where you want to be. There's no right or wrong answer here. And anybody who tells you, well, Management Studio is gone, you have to get rid of that, Azure Data Studio is where it's at, not true. So your next question, if you're a DBA, which guessing from the title, most of you are, maybe not all, and if you're just here to learn about notebooks, awesome. Thank you. They do a lot of cool stuff. So you want to know, all right, so I'm here. I know about Azure Data Studio. You've just covered that it's not just for Azure. Can I do DBA stuff with it? Yeah, out of the box, it's a little bit limited. And the next slide is going to explain kind of how we can enhance that and move on. But obviously, if you're a DBA, you want to do administrative tasks. How can I make that easier? How maybe is ADS even a little better for some parts of that than Management Studio is, even though we all know and perhaps love it. So that's where we get to extensions. So what are these things? And then we're going to look at actually what these are. So what are they? Confusingly named, echoing the theme of the first few slides, they are VSIX files, so actually Visual Studio extensions. What's cool about it is, and we're going to take a tour of the extension kind of marketplace here in a minute, they're nearly all exposed except for proprietary vendor stuff. All the Microsoft ones, nearly all of them, are exposed through GitHub repos that you can fork and do your own thing with. So if you see an extension that Microsoft's done, and you're like, man, that's really cool. I want to do that too. but I also want to do this extra thing that it doesn't do right now. You can do that. And that's one of the exciting things. And it's been really fun giving this presentation or variations on it over the last several months. The team on Twitter is absolutely wonderful to work with and kind of talk back and forth. They're really passionate. That whole tools team is really passionate about the experiences that they're building. And if you tag Azure Data Studio or Julie or Alan Yu, or even other folks on the team, you're likely to get a response back. And it may not be exactly what you want, but they do try to be interactive with folks that are working on this, and they're really proud of what they're building. So these extensions, they do enhance the experience, they extend it, thus the name. Are they hard to set up? Not really. So if you're in Azure Data Studio and you see one, you just click install on the marketplace, which we'll see here in a minute, and it downloads it. And then it may or may not prompt you for a reload. That's behavior that's changing. And I'll talk about that here at the end of this slide. If you're outside of Azure Data Studio, you can just download the VSIX file. There's a menu option within ADS to kind of bring that in. So your next question might be, well, okay, this sounds all right. This is not as scary as I thought. I'm kind of glad I came to this session because maybe this can help me. But I use Redgate SQL Search. I use SentryOne Plan Explorer. I use, vendor extensions, if you will, in Management Studio to improve my experience over there. Can I do it here? Yes. So let's go take a look at that on the VM we've built here. Okay, so what we've got, this is Azure Data Studio. This is a late August release of it. They go on roughly a monthly cadence. So before we get to extensions, let me give you kind of a very brief tour. So this is going to be similar to what you're used to from Management Studio. I've connected to an instance that's local to here. I have some databases that I've installed for various reasons. I can see security, logins, those sorts of things. It's pretty straightforward, right? I did talk about how this functions as well for on-prem stuff as it does for Azure, but let's have kind of a quick look at this here. So these are our Azure subscriptions that I have. There's kind of a simple tab, if you will, and I can pull those up and interact with those in the same way. It's a nice interface for dealing with managed instances as well. I don't have one of those to show you. Not really germane to this, but if you're in an environment where you're using that, this is pretty cool stuff. Again, Postgres as well, SQL Server, Azure SQL Database, what have you. Big data clusters. If you're interested in that, in my opinion, Azure Data Studio is really the best GUI tool to interact with that. I am far from an expert on those, but I know there are sessions at this SQL Bits and Past Summit in the fall from people like Ben Weissman and Mohammed Darab, who go very much in depth to kind of what that is and explaining that to you. So if you've read about that, you're like, it seems cumbersome to deal with. I want a GUI to handle that. Those folks will do an awesome job kind of getting you deeper into that and maybe show you some uses for this tool as well. But this is kind of the basic connections tab. So this isn't too scary for us here. Let's look at extensions though. So you can see we've got notebooks. We'll cover those obviously in a few minutes. We've got Explorer, we've got source control, and we've got this down here, extensions. So let's look at these. So we've got a marketplace. So everything we see here is not all there is, but there is a marketplace experience to grab some of this stuff. And so, we can see some stuff. So when you click into one of these, you'll see, and I kind of have a basic build that I use. The admin pack for SQL Server, in my opinion, is a must, and I'll show you here in a minute why I think that is. If you're a pure DBA or mostly a DBA, and you're coming to this, and there's some stuff you feel like you're missing, DAC pack interaction, agent, stuff like that, admin pack is a very important piece to bring that experience over here. If you're doing data virtualization with things like Polybase, big data clusters, those sorts of things, that's an extension that you're very much going to want to have. And like I said, that those experiences, in my opinion, in ADS far surpass what Management Studio offers. So if you're spending your time in those, definitely have a look at that as well. But I referred to some vendor stuff. You're like, well, I like SQL Search, or I like SQL Prompt, or I like Plan Explorer. Well, you kind of see all the vendors we know and hopefully maybe perhaps love. We've got Idera stuff here. We've got Redgate SQL Prompt, Redgate SQL Search, SentryOne Plan Explorer. We have a best practices assessment from Microsoft as well. This is one of the interesting things about dealing with Azure Data Studio. Is it's a wonderful product. They iterate quickly, and the vendors do as well. So my general advice is to stick with the stable build over the insiders build, though a lot of my demos, including this one, actually runs on an insiders build. But if you're not quite as adventurous as I am, I think I'd stick with that here. If you're running always on availability groups, here we're getting into some custom-ish things. Some of these are written by Microsoft employees, but not kind of under that umbrella. Some are just written by community folks who have a passion for this stuff. And we have some language packs down here as well. So those are extensions. And like I said, if you want one that you don't have, you just go here, you click install. And for many of these now, and getting back to kind of the quick iterative nature of what the development team is doing, for many of these, the install doesn't even require a restart anymore. As quickly as I can change slides, they like to knock my slides right out of date. So they're doing awesome work. So those are extensions. So hopefully if you use some vendor stuff, or if you want to use PowerShell, using PowerShell within Management Studios is pretty weird, not really all that possible, but you can integrate the experience here. We'll look at a PowerShell notebook later, but there's also a terminal here as well, and I'll kind of close this and pull up the terminal. So we can have a look at that. So you can write PowerShell down here, and there are some extensions in early-ish days to have kind of a robust PowerShell development environment here as well. So those are extensions. So back to the slides, and let's talk about a couple other things while we do that. Okay, so we've covered extensions. So let's talk about Runbooks. So we've touched on the product briefly, kind of what I think about it, why I think it might help, but we haven't really talked about why I think it might help you or kind of met you where you're at. So let's do that. So where do your Runbooks live? Realistically, I was an operational DBA for several years before I got into consulting a few years back. So I've written a lot of runbooks. I've consulted in environments where they did this really well, where they did it really poorly, where they didn't do it at all. And so these examples kind of run the gamut there. So where do your runbooks live? If we're being truthful, a lot of ours, they might live in SharePoint. Maybe they're fairly well organized in there even. Maybe the DBA team has a kind of a subsite there, and all of our runbooks and incident response type things are all there. Probably not. Might be though. Maybe they're on a file share. Maybe our operations team set up a file share, and they're like, oh, just put the Word documents out there, and everybody can get to them, or nobody can get them. Maybe the security's never set up quite right, or not always set up quite right. I've seen it. I've participated in it. Worst case, and this is actually a true story. It's on somebody's local system who was on vacation when things break. Now, what the sub-bullet there doesn't say, but I'll share with you, is that particular person was on vacation in a very remote part of China when that happened. And not only were they not here, or not anywhere where I could kind of converse with them easily, they were in a very remote part. Where it was a day plus before we were able to speak to them. So that's obviously a worst case, but it can happen. People, maybe not so much now, but people do travel globally to visit family and friends and in-laws and all those sorts of things. And that can happen. Somebody's got the best response document in the world that they've saved locally that nobody else can see. So we have to kind of account for that here as well. So let's talk about what the formats are. And I've seen all kinds. So Word and plain text are kind of the top two, which is why they're on this slide. I've seen Excel sheets where kind of the cells were used as like a step through. This next cell is what you do here. Not my favorite format. Certainly seen it. Plain text. I've seen Notepad. I've seen .txt files that do this. Almost the best case is you have a Word document that's a richer document. Hopefully it's got screenshots, maybe it's got links that you can click to scripts and source control and all that, but probably not. It probably has something somebody wrote up in the middle of the night once when they addressed this issue. They covered it the next morning in the kind of post-mortem meeting with the team, and it was largely forgotten after that. And best case, it's in SharePoint, it's in your Runbooks folder. Nobody quite remembers what problem they were solving or that it even exists out there until they go look at it. But a lot of times when we're responding to incidents overnight, time is of the essence. I mean, I've supported systems where we were fined over our promise downtime. We were fined $1,000 a minute, and that's real. I've not made that up. So in a circumstance like that, if I'm knocking around SharePoint for 4 minutes trying to put my hands on a runbook to fix an issue we've already solved, potentially that's $4,000. If it takes me longer, that document doesn't exist. You're quickly getting into somebody's salary where maybe, unfortunately, like adjustments to hiring and staffing and things, that's the nicest way I can put that, are made as a result of what the DBA team maybe didn't handle right. The last thing we'll come to is, this is not uncommon at all, if you are sharing, let's say, overnight support with typically an offshore team or somebody that handles some off hours maintenance, hopefully emergencies as well. A lot of times, to kind of guarantee or validate that the response was handled right, you'll have them send a response to you that says, well, here's my screenshots of what happened. I ran this query, it returned 5 rows, or it returned this value, or what have you. Perfectly fine, good. Awkward though, because maybe they've created another document and they didn't put the runbook stuff in it at all. They just said like runbook step 7 and here's the screenshot, and runbook step 9 and here's the screenshot of what happened. And a lot of times in my experience, you're turning this over to some sort of an operations manager or outside communications manager or something like that, where they said, well, I have to put this together because we have to turn this over to the customer, and there's an SLA on that because they want to know what happened and what we did and how we handled it. All completely valid, all things I've seen, all things that are really hard to do in any of the formats that I've just talked about. And if you're trying to put together a cohesive, here's what we did, here's what happened, and here's why, the two most fundamental parts of that are here's what happened and here's what we did. And that's kind of where runbooks can help here, or where notebooks can help, because we have these runbooks. They may be in the worst format, they may be in the worst place, but we have them. Notebooks can help us bring that together. So let's talk about what's in them, and then let's talk about how notebooks really make all this better. So what's in our runbooks? This is a sampling. Hopefully step-by-step directions to handle something. Maybe it's maintenance, maybe it's an emergency response, maybe it's an always-on availability group failover, something like that. Who knows? But it's step-by-step. Do X, do Y, do Z. Something happens. There are probably scripts in there. Maybe it's links, maybe it's text scripts. Hey, in this step-by-step directions, when you get to step 6, copy this out of the document, execute it against something, and then put the intended results in an email. If you've done a really awesome job with the runbooks as you use them, then there's probably a place like paste screenshot here. We'll turn this over to the operations manager. In my experience, that's rare. Good on you if you're doing it. Notebooks are still going to make your life easier, but for most of us sitting here, and for me, this is something we're not always good at. It's easy to stand in front of a group of people and say, well, this is something you should do, but I speak from experience that we weren't always good at this, and even the teams I led should have been better. And I wish I'd had Azure Data Studio and notebooks 5 years ago, but I don't. So here I am telling you why I think they're great and why you should use them. So now we're kind of at the thing like, All right, something breaks at 3 a.m., somebody's phone rings, whether they're offshore, onshore, whatever your support situation is. Does a runbook have everything in it that somebody needs to respond to whatever the issue is? Do you have the scripts? Do you have the place for the screenshot to show the results so the operations manager has it? Do you have clear instructions for somebody? We've broken something or something has broken itself. Here's how we handle it. If not, like I said, sometimes with a 24/7 system, downtime is punished by the minute, often financially. And that is going to reflect poorly on our team and potentially on our job. So we don't want that to happen. So that's something to think about as we carry forward into kind of the second half of our time here. Do our runbooks have everything in them? Because that's kind of the first step. I'm going to show you notebooks and say why I think they're cool and show you some basic examples of maintenance and all that. But if the runbook doesn't have everything we need and we turn it into a notebook of some type, that's not helped us. We still have a better vehicle for the same kind of not great thing. And so half of this talk, honestly, is me trying to prevent that from happening because I remember the pain that it dealt me. So last but not least, before we get into kind of the notebooks part of this, is what's the process for keeping them up to date? And really what I've seen is two things. So are they maintained by technical people? In other words, is the DBA team charged with this? Or are there junior DBAs charged with this, or there's maybe a technical writer or something like that can speak DBAs and say, well, I think I know what you mean here. Help me adjust it, and we'll kind of keep this moving forward for the whole group. I've seen it. It's what's more likely is the last bullet on this slide is where a lot of times your critical run books is something you've promised a customer. It's part of a contractual requirement or response to a previous incident that did not go well. And you have non-technical, maybe communications people or something like that handling this in the context of or completely as like a business continuity plan. But that tends to diverge pretty quickly from what the DBAs may actually be doing. Maybe your process has changed, maybe you've upgraded SQL Server and your handling of that incident is different, or you were working around a bug that the SQL Server product team or Azure SQL team is now fixed, and that process has changed, but the non-technical people don't know. They're not in your meetings, you haven't told them. That's all important. So I say all of that to say this stuff, this documentation, as much as we all hate writing it, has got to be right. Notebooks are going to add a lot of functionality that you'll see that we don't have. And it's going to make some of this stuff like pasting the results and things like that in much easier. But if we don't have the process right, like I said, I like to sneak this in here. Notebooks, we're going to be doing some cooler stuff with the same things. We don't want to do that. So without further ado, let's talk about notebooks. So again, these folks may not know a lot about those. What are they before we look at them? So what they are is, if you've heard about Jupyter Notebooks, like I said, I suspect this is a DBA heavy crowd. My apologies if not. Some of this likely, if you're a data engineer or something like that, you already know what I'm about to say. These are split off from the IPython open source project in 2014. They support kernels, which is basically like an execution context where you can run code, or you can have text cells, and we'll talk about Markdown and how to make these pretty as well, where they almost look like a pretty nice Word document. ADS supports a SQL kernel, PowerShell, Spark, PySpark. We'll briefly go through that list a little bit later. But how do they differ from SQL scripts? Well, they're laid out in cells. So not Excel cells. It's basically a window that spans and kind of the width of the screen. And so you can see here's the code I'm going to run. The results will display down below that. The cells, like I said, can be either text or code. Text is going to be Markdown, and we'll go through kind of what that means. It's a way to beautify what you're putting in here, make it easier, especially for junior folks who maybe, if you're tasked with the instant response in the middle of the night, you want bold type, you want bullet points, you want to be like, all right, 1, 2, and 3, here I've done it, and the result is this, save it, send it. So that's very different from a query. Even if you comment, which none of us are probably as good at as we should be. This is a much richer experience than just a lot of comments within the script. The next question is, where are the results rendered? So I've done something, I've maintained something, I've responded to an emergency, the script has run, fantastic, but I need to send the results, like we said, to an ops manager. I have to persist them, show them to my boss or the senior DBA or whatever. They persist directly in the notebook when you save it. But a security call out here, that's awesome, but it can be an issue. So depending on what you're responding to, depending on what the query is, depending on the information it exposes, you're going to have a significant problem here. If you run something and it exposes information that is either PII or governed under HIPAA here in the States, or any sort of health records is what we see most of in the States, but it could be under a variety of EU regulations, GDPR, something. If you've exposed something you're not supposed to, you need to take that into account, especially if these are maintained in source control, which I'll mention now and a little bit later, because that's really where these need to live. So that's important. Be cognizant of what the notebook is showing and make sure you're securing that properly in whatever your environment is, whatever regulatory environment you operate under, whether you're attending SQL bits from the States, from Europe, or elsewhere. So there's scripts with pictures, basically. I mean, it's not completely it's not a complete way to describe them, but that's mostly what they are. They can be very detailed. They can be colorful. So like I said, you can really take advantage of this to lead a junior resource through something that's pretty deep, where you've not scared them. You've handled it before. You're at a point in your career where you're able not to wake up in the middle of the night all the time, and it's their job now. But you have the ability through these to lay out some things very clearly for kind of what they can do, and hopefully guide them through easily. Another nice thing, and I've been on site and seen this, is a lot of times junior resources, or even senior resources, depending on kind of the visual medium that you're comfortable with, will print out runbooks, and it might be an old version. It probably is. It's stuck to their cube wall, or it's stuck to their desk at home, or wherever they may be. And so now you've got a printed document. You're looking at that. You're looking at your screen. You're looking at this other thing. You got to paste it to. And when we're talking about minutes in terms of a response, that costs us time. And these things, as much as I hate the term living document, these are able to stay dynamic, especially if you store them in source control. Maybe you might store individual versions by people's names or something like that. This is your template for that. Open it up, save the response that you've made, send it to me. These do stay as living documents, which is useful, like I said, for postmortems, instant response, all those sorts of things. And they're handy for demos and examples as well, which is a great segue, if I do say so myself, to Markdown. And let's look at how these work. So let's get to our VM here. And what we've got is the Let's Learn Markdown notebook. This is super boring, right? When we see some Markdown, I don't know what any of this means. There's no pictures. You promised me there'd be pictures. There aren't any. Why not? So if you give the preview pane here, now we have those. And so these, and this is a user experience change that the team made that I really like. And let's actually close terminal to make this a little better experience for us. So we have this rendered side by side, which is nice. And so I'm just going to do some call outs. You'll note that there's a WYSIWYG editor now. There's a lot of development investment going into this. I'm still going to show kind of the old school thing. Some of this is quite easy to do with these editors here, bold, italic, underline, the kind of things that we would expect. Some of it is less easy. So I'll show you the Markdown examples, but definitely pay attention and keep your eyes peeled as the WYSIWYG experience matures over each month. So we've got a pull quote here. So this is something you want to call a junior resources attention to. Hey, I really want you to see this. And there it is. So we've got kind of a write caret, and there's your pull quote. I really want you to see this. I believe these support actually down to 6 either pound signs, hashtags, depending on what your age is. I've shown 4 here, so what we have is actually biggest heading, slightly less big, a little bit smaller, smallest, just a way to kind of give us that heading, like if you've laid out a Word document, if you have one of these that's a very serious outline of stuff, you can do all that there. How do I make text bold? 2 asterisks. How do I make text italic? Single asterisk. So if I want to bold and italicize everything, how do I do that? 3 asterisks, 2 plus 1. Okay, so we've gotten down to here. So one thing I briefly mentioned, and I do want to kind of point out, is a lot of times, especially for junior resources or somebody who you're trying to kind of expand their skill set in some area, you may want to link out to a Microsoft video or a video from a trainer that you're a fan of, or a YouTube video or a video you made that's an internal thing. So hey, I want to show you this. This is going to help you do this. And this would be more in the demo example realm than the maintenance and emergency response realm. So what you do here is this. So I hold my mouse over this. There's a link. And the reason I'm doing that, so you see it's a YouTube link. So when I click this, so if it's internal or if it's something like Channel 9 from Microsoft or something like that, and that's a trusted domain and you don't want this to pop up, you can configure trusted domains here, add internal video sites or image sites or whatever to that list when you hyperlink anything. I haven't done that, but I do want to show. So we've got open. So we go to YouTube. It says this is going to be a racing video of me. The suspense is killing all of us, I'm sure. Here's YouTube rendering in full excruciatingly slow color. And there's me in my race car last year. So not that exciting, though we finished okay. But that's a way to link to a video, and it's as simple as this. You see, I used it as pull quotes. I've got the right caret here. I've got the link as here. That's encased in brackets, and then simply the YouTube link encased in parentheses here. So I have a non-ordered list. So I've got dash dash. I start a list. I end a list. Straightforward. Now, before they added the preview experience, this next demo I thought was a little more interesting. So I'm going to highlight, I'm going to show you this over here. So we've got, I'm number 1, I'm number 2, I think, I'm definitely number 3. So let's look, and I can highlight this. So number 4 is in the middle. So when you make an ordered list, when you make a numbered list, it will outsmart you. And if you put 1, 1,000, and 3, it'll say 1, 2, 3. So you see I put 4. It renders as 2. So it will outsmart you there. So if for whatever reason you're trying to put steps out of order, that's, it's going to outsmart you there. Let's talk about images as well. So we've got an image here. Like I said, I'm pretty fond of motor racing. And so I've got a link that's on my blog. It's an image. You can see the syntax here, and it renders over here. Image. Very straightforward. That syntax is not complicated at all. Maybe you want to know how to comment, and that's how we do this here. Again, very straightforward. Comments are really only going to be if the runbooks or if the notebooks are evolving. So if you have a junior resource looking at this, they're never going to look at the not rendered part. But last but not least, we all need a little levity and humor these days. Can I put a GIF in these to make somebody laugh after they've reached the end of an emergency response or some maintenance log or something like that? You can. So that looks just like the link up here, except you'll see the file extensions, JPEG GIF, different. And we have a corgi on a skateboard, and it's an American corgi because there's no tail. And my wife taught me that because we have a corgi, and apparently in England, most of them have tails, ours do not. That's Markdown. So let's flip back to the slides just for a minute. And we'll kind of bring this to a close here with what we can do with this stuff. So we've talked a lot about process. We've talked about what I think we should do with it. We've talked about, maybe ways that incidents I handled. It would have been a huge, massive help. But what can we actually do with these? So let's have a look at a maintenance notebook. And again, these are basic, crude examples, mostly as a function of time. just you can see, oh, that's a thing I can do. And what I really want this to do is spark your interest and say, well, I don't rebuild an index from a script, but here's some things that I schedule. And then we'll talk about how we can schedule these as well. So back to here. So, all right, so we've got our sample maintenance notebook, and I do test my demos. So we're going to clear our result. And what I've got is something simple. And like I said, this is, for a junior DBA, perhaps. Maybe you're not scheduling this, but you should be. We'll talk about in a minute why that is and how you can do that. So I've selected my connection above. That's kind of pre-baked because we're on about a 50 to 55 minute time span here. And then let's execute the T-SQL cell below. So here's some code. I've got a play button here, which is just run cell. So, all right, I'm going to use AdventureWorks 2017. I need to rebuild these indexes because, they're heavily fragmented, super important. I'm all on old spinny disks. I've run this, and we get our results pane down here. And you see in Management Studio what you would expect to see. A couple things I want to call out here. So we've got this black dot here. That means it's not saved. So if I were to close this and send it to my boss, say, see, I ran it, you're going to see the old version, which probably doesn't show that I ran it. If I hit Control S, the black dot goes to next. This is saved. I can send it to my manager and say, see, I ran this. It took, less than a second. All is well and good. But how could you schedule this? Because this probably isn't realistic, right? We're not telling somebody, hey, here's a bunch of notebooks I made for you to reorganize indexes or rebuild them or do kind of anything of this nature. But we've run T-SQL, we've got a SQL kernel, but I really want to schedule this. So let's right click on my local instance here. Let's go to manage, and I want to mention a couple of things. So here, and this is a basic one and it's crude, but ADS uses a data visualization tool under the covers called Sandance. Sandance does really cool stuff. If you look up in the Microsoft Docs, it makes for a rough demo because we're editing JSON by hand, and it's probably not the most exciting thing. But you see we've got some interactive data viz here, which is something in Management Studio we don't really have. Sandance is capable of way more than this. And if you look up Insight widgets in the Microsoft documentation for Azure Data Studio, there's some good examples on there showing you some basics like file size, how you get a query to feed a visualization like this. And this is another example where I really want that to spark an idea with you, like, oh, there's some stuff I'd love to visualize when I've right-clicked on an instance and I go to manage. There's things I want to see, whatever it may be, whatever query you can write to show you what you need to know about your environment, you can do that on kind of this home page right here. You can create a notebook from here as well. We've got our database list again, kind of what you'd expect, very Management Studio-y. Now let's go to SQL Agent. So you'll note I downloaded the admin pack, gives me SQL Agent functionality here, and I've got jobs. And this is a basic instance that I stand up kind of just for this session. Pretty boring, right? We do get some nice data viz over here, like, well, so you'll get green or red, did the job run, did it not run? But we're not here to talk about jobs. You can monitor them here. This is all the things we're used to, but we have a notebook thing for SQL Agent. What the heck does that mean? Well, here's what it means. So we've got a notebook job. So we can, that notebook that I have, that maintenance notebook, I can bring that into this path here, and I can say execute this and store the results in a database that I say execute it against here. So you can split that if you wish to. You name it. You pick a schedule just like you would, just to schedule an agent job. You add a description and you click OK. So if you have a notebook that you're like, well, we're doing this regularly, or we want to automate this, we don't want people running it, the agent functionality within Azure Data Studio lets you schedule notebooks as well. So I think that's very cool stuff. Let's flip back to the slides just for a little bit. And all right, back to the slides we've gone. So we talked about maintenance notebooks. Again, not that exciting, but I hope it fires that spark. Emergency notebooks. So let's look at something. And there's a tiny bit of a story here. Is I had really a wonderful manager of mine set me on the path to do a lot of great things. But as most managers are who used to be technical and have maybe have a foot outside of that realm anymore, wasn't as technical as he thought, and demanded kind of production level access to our database environment for a 24/7 365 app. And was well drilled in terms of creating transactions, committing them, or rolling it back. Was working on a query one day to do some analysis that his boss had asked for, and left the transaction hanging as he walked down the street to go to a coffee house. Not great. And certainly we didn't handle it this way then because Azure Data Studio didn't exist, but we're going to handle it this way now. So what we've got is, okay, he's gone. We don't need this anymore. So let's do this in T-SQL. So I've installed SP-Who is active here. You see I've got my SQL kernel. We can also run PySpark, Spark Scala, Spark R, Python 3, PowerShell. So we've got all that. And I have this kind of clearly laid out, like junior DBA sitting there. They don't get to go to lunch because the senior folks are going to lunch, and they're just sitting here watching stuff go wrong or right, mostly wrong. And all right, so, and this is not what my manager did, but here we've done this. It runs. All right, we're hanging it up for 30 seconds. Oh my goodness, my monitoring tool's fired off. This is bad. I got something I got to kill. So I run SP-Who is active here. Session ID. Okay, it says replace the SPID and the kill. I've got this bolded. All right, I know that's 52. I run it in T-SQL. Commands completed successfully. You don't get exactly what I would hope from here, but it says it was successful. It's kill, so it means it killed something, right? Back to Management Studio we go. Severe error has occurred. I have punched this transaction right in the face and brought it to its knees. That's a potentially valuable response. That's T-SQL. So we're going to save that. We're going to do this in PowerShell as well. All right, so we've got here. So I've kicked it off again. So if you're not familiar with DBA tools, let me flip back to this just for a minute. DBA tools is wonderful. We're going to talk about this to kind of close this out. It's a community-driven open source thing. There's presentations at SQL Bits by Rob Sewell and others. Rob is awesome and is really doing a lot of innovative stuff in this space. My talk is very much 101. Rob's doing awesome stuff with notebooks in this across a variety of languages and all that. If I've piqued your interest here, let him kind of carry you forward there. But what I'm going to show is very basic PowerShell using 2 DBA tools, commandlets of, I think, roughly like 250 to 300. And you see this, I'm not a PowerShell whiz. I would never profess to be one. I can handle syntax like this. And they make almost all of this easy, and there's robust testing, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Automation becomes increasingly important if we're a DBA. This talk is not about that, but I want to show you, like, we can do PowerShell stuff here. If you're not familiar with DBA tools and that group's work, I want you to know more about this after we're done. It's cool stuff, but let's show what it can do. So, okay, I've kicked off my transaction. My boss has gone down the block for coffee again. Oh my goodness. So I'm doing get DBA open transaction, which is like a PowerShell-y version of SP-Who is active, courtesy of the DBA tools folks. My SPID is 68. Like, oh, okay, it says find SPID, replace it. All right, I'm glad I bolded that because I got to go. It's really fast. We're down. Our main table is blocked. Now here's a little bit of the bummer. So I've run it. I didn't get an error, so it worked. But I don't have the relief that comes in with, I know that died. But I have Management Studio back here to say, aha, it's died once again. So again, very basic PowerShell, very basic T-SQL, very basic maintenance, but I hope that your interest is sparked from this. So let's bring this home and kind of wrap this up, and so we can have time for questions and other things. So what real world scenarios beyond the basic ones I showed can we do? You can automate. So a lot of us have been in environments or operated in those where we have a morning checklist of stuff we have to do. We've got to check that the backups ran. We run a DBCC check DB every night, right? Hopefully. We need to check failed jobs. We need to review error logs, all those sorts of things. That's onerous. It's manual. It consumes time. There is a fantastic And I say fantastic, I put it in the bullet because I want you to know how fantastic this is. Link on my resource slide. So Jess Pomfret used to be my neighbor-ish here in the States. She lived in Ohio. I lived just south of there, one state down, as it were. Made a wonderful SQL Server Central post on how you use DBA tools to automate all of this. Please look at that, especially if you're tasking junior DBAs with spend the first 2, 3, 4 hours of your day reviewing a checklist. This is a great use of their time, a great use of yours as well to automate this and then free them up to do the things that probably they should be doing. Performance tuning, optimization, things like that. If you have a large estate, particularly one that you've just taken control of, maybe you work at a company that kind of grows by acquisition, you need to report on database features. So the databases portion, if you click that link there, and I know the slides will be available after this, click on that portion. There's a lot of things there that report on this feature is active, or this is set up, or this isn't. So if you need to put together some kind of a report to get a handle on your estate, you have the ability to do that there. Homegrown performance report. So I showed you how to run a query. We rebuilt some indexes in a T-SQL notebook. I have worked in environments where the budget for monitoring tools was nothing, and they said roll your own. Figure out what you want to zero in on. It's not a great environment, but a lot of us have worked in them. A lot of us are. And you have the ability to, those queries you write, to maybe send me an email at the end of the day and tell me my 10 worst performing stored procs, or send me my index fragmentation, or whatever you're interested in. You can put those in a notebook. Showed you how to use SQL Server Agent to schedule those and kind of move on from there. And app ancillary reports as well. So something where they go to the product team and they said, listen, we need an email sent to us about how much money moved through this system this day. And maybe it's moving money around for financial reasons, or it's a banking system or government benefits or something like that. And the dev team says, okay, yeah, we can do that. It's in the product backlog. You'll have it in 6 months. And they say, well, I need it next week. A lot of times, realistically, and this has happened to me, the DBA team ends up with that. And I said, well, you can do it. There's database send mail, and you can put it together, and you don't have the runway that those people do, and just do it. You could build those here. So you could do a notebook, whether you schedule it or not. You can kind of set all that up here and have a much nicer interface. It's much easier to take care of, put it in source control, all those sorts of things, because that's one of those things that gets forgotten a lot. And all of this should be in source control all the time. Easier said than done, of course, but these notebooks should live in source control. So we're not chasing them through SharePoint. We're not chasing them through file shares. We're not getting them off the laptop of somebody who's been on holiday for 2 weeks. One more thing I want to point out to you. So like I said, part of how I've really enjoyed presenting on Azure Data Studio this year is the community that's kind of grown up around this. Is awesome. The team is great. Folks like Rob, Sewell, and other folks are doing really cool stuff. Honestly, much smarter and more innovative than I am. I feel like maybe it's my job to kind of set the table for them, and you can really go down the rabbit hole with what they're doing. So if you're not familiar with Glenn, he's from the States. You've likely used his diagnostic queries or heard of them. Incredibly robust list. It's going to identify a lot of issues or potential issues with your server. If you're tasked with any sort of troubleshooting, kind of roll your own maintenance. Glenn's been doing this for years, and they're fantastic. But it was just like a big query file you could run. So a couple things have happened here. If you go to Rob Sewell's blog, which is mentioned on my resources slide, he has some ways to kind of automate these. And like I said, this is the 101 class, that's probably 102, so I don't want to steal the thunder from him. Glenn has also taken it upon himself, and I have one link here where he is creating these diagnostic query notebooks through Azure Data Studio to make that experience a little more pleasant, not just a giant query file. You've got some graphical elements there and things like that. Definitely hit those links. Follow Glenn, the best hardware person in the SQL Server world that I can think of, and I'm really glad he's doing some stuff with ADS now as well. On that note, that's time. This is me. Here are all the ways to find me. Please do reach out. I know it's difficult. We can't all be in the same place. That'll probably continue for a few months, but love talking about this stuff. I hope my enthusiasm comes through, even though I'm at my desk at home. And I hope this helped you. So here are some resources. There are Microsoft teams that do this. I've mentioned Rob, I've mentioned Jess, I've mentioned the DBA tools folks as well. And thank you so much for having me. Thanks for attending. Thanks for being a part of our database world. And bye for now, and I hope to speak to you soon.